The ring hit the polished boardroom table with a sharp metallic click. Every executive froze. At the far end of the room, Daniel Reed stood beside the presentation screen, one hand still gripping a stack of engineering reports. Across from him, CEO Claire Morgan had just dropped to one knee. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling despite 20 pairs of eyes staring at her. "I know this is the worst possible place to ask you, but you already said no twice." No one breathed. "And I realized," Claire continued, "if I waited for the perfect moment, I might lose you a third time." Daniel looked at the ring, then at Claire, and for one impossible second, the entire boardroom waited to see if the single father was about to reject the most powerful woman in the company again. 3 months earlier, Daniel would have laughed if someone had told him this could happen. He was 39, a widowed father, and the head maintenance engineer at Morgan Urban Systems, a company that designed public transportation infrastructure across the country. Most mornings, Daniel arrived before sunrise, checked the building systems, fixed whatever had broken overnight, and left early enough to pick up his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, from school. His life was measured in practical things: school lunches, overdue laundry, bills on the refrigerator, and the little blue notebook Lily carried everywhere, filled with drawings of the mother she barely remembered. Daniel had learned not to expect more from life. Then Claire Morgan noticed him. Not because he was handsome, though people occasionally said he was. Not because he was trying to impress anyone. Claire noticed him because during a major storm, the company's data center nearly flooded. While executives argued about insurance and emergency contractors, Daniel quietly took off his jacket, waded through ankle-deep water, and spent 4 hours keeping the cooling system alive. At dawn, Claire found him sitting on the floor beside a leaking pipe, exhausted. "You saved us millions," she told him. Daniel shrugged. The pumps were there. Someone had to turn them on. That was the first time Claire smiled at him differently. But Daniel didn't notice, or pretended not to. A few weeks later, Claire asked him to dinner. Not as his CEO, as Claire. Daniel stared at the invitation on his phone for nearly an hour before answering. "I can't. Lily has her school science night." Claire replied almost immediately. "Tomorrow?" Daniel looked at the screen, then typed, "Still can't." That was the first rejection. The second came 2 weeks later. Claire had been under crushing pressure. The board wanted faster growth. Investors were questioning her decisions. Every room she entered seemed filled with people waiting for her to make one mistake. One evening, she found Daniel on the roof of the company parking garage, eating a sandwich alone before heading home. She sat beside him. For a few quiet minutes, neither spoke. Then Claire finally said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Daniel nearly dropped his sandwich. Claire gave a nervous laugh, but her eyes stayed serious. "I'm not asking you to say it back." Daniel looked down at the traffic moving below. He wanted to say yes. That was the terrifying part. Instead, he said, "Claire, you shouldn't." Her face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "Because I'm your boss?" "Because you're Lily's boss too, in a way. My job pays for her life." "That's not what I meant." "I know." "Then what are you afraid of?" Daniel had no answer. So Claire received his second rejection in silence. After that, everything became awkward. Not cruel, not angry, just painful. Claire stopped finding reasons to pass Daniel's department. Daniel avoided the executive floor unless he absolutely had to go there. Their messages became short and professional. Then the third twist came. Lily's school called Daniel one Tuesday afternoon. She had fainted during gym class. By the time Daniel reached the hospital, doctors told him it was dehydration and exhaustion, nothing life-threatening. But Lily had been pushing herself too hard. Daniel knew why. She had been staying awake late, working on a project called The Things My Dad Never Says. When Daniel opened her blue notebook, he found a new drawing. It showed him standing alone beside a little girl. Above them, Lily had written, "Dad says we're enough. But sometimes he looks like he wishes Mom could come back so he wouldn't have to be enough by himself." Daniel sat beside her hospital bed and cried without making a sound. Lily woke up and saw him. "Did I write something wrong?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart." "Then why are you crying?" Daniel looked at her tiny hand. "Because sometimes," he said, "the truth hurts before it helps." The next morning, Daniel walked into work with a decision. He was going to transfer to another department. Not because he hated Claire, because being near her was making him realize how lonely he had become. But before he could submit the request, he was summoned to an emergency board meeting. The company had lost a major contract. Not because of Daniel, because the board had ignored his safety recommendations months earlier. Now a competitor had exposed the weakness, and investors were furious. Claire stood before the board, exhausted but composed. Then one director blamed Daniel. The engineering department failed to communicate the risk. Daniel stared at him. Claire stared too. The room waited for Daniel to defend himself. Instead, Claire placed a thick folder on the table. "No," she said. "Daniel warned us." Inside were his reports, his emails, his recommendations. All ignored. A board member frowned. "Why weren't we informed?" Claire's expression hardened. "You were." The room shifted. For the first time, Claire openly admitted her own mistake. "I saw the reports," she said. "I believed we had time." Daniel looked at her. She could have protected herself. Instead, she took responsibility. The chairman demanded a private vote about her leadership. Claire simply nodded. Daniel suddenly understood something. He had been afraid that loving Claire would mean becoming dependent on her. But Claire had been carrying the opposite fear, that everyone only respected her because of her position. Neither of them knew how to be loved without wondering what it cost. Claire left the room before the vote. Daniel found her alone in the hallway. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel said, "You didn't have to take all of that." Claire gave him a tired smile. "Yes, I did." He stepped closer. "I was wrong too." Claire looked up. "About what?" Thinking saying no was protecting Lily. He swallowed. "I think I was protecting myself." Claire's eyes filled, but she didn't move. Then Daniel said the words she had waited months to hear. "I don't want to run anymore." But before Claire could answer, the boardroom doors opened. The chairman called her back inside, and Daniel watched her walk away. He didn't know if she would still be CEO when she returned. He didn't know if their chance had come too late. 20 minutes later, Claire returned. The board had voted to keep her, with strict conditions. She had survived, but something in her seemed changed. She looked at Daniel, then at the board members. And suddenly, before anyone understood what she was doing, Claire reached into her purse. That was how the ring landed on the table. Back in the present, Daniel stared at her on one knee. One board member whispered, "Is this really happening?" Claire almost laughed through her tears. "I spent my whole life making important decisions in rooms like this," she said. "I thought if I controlled everything, I'd never lose anyone again." She looked directly at Daniel. "But I was wrong. Love isn't a business decision." Daniel's eyes burned. Claire opened the ring box. "So, Daniel Reed, will you marry me?" Silence. Then Daniel slowly walked around the table. He knelt beside her, not to take the ring, just to whisper, "You know you could have asked me somewhere less terrifying." Claire laughed. "So that's not a no?" Daniel smiled for the first time in months. "No." Claire's face fell. Then he added, "It's the easiest yes I've ever had." The board erupted, not with applause at first, with shocked laughter, tears, and finally clapping. Daniel never cared that Claire was a CEO. Claire never needed Daniel to become someone extraordinary. That was the truth they both had to learn. Sometimes love doesn't arrive when your life is perfect. Sometimes it arrives when you are tired, afraid, grieving, and convinced you have nothing left to give. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is not say yes to another person. It is first admitting that their heart is still allowed to want something more. Because after loss, you don't honor the people you loved by refusing happiness. You honor them by having the courage to live again.